Welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to the Air Raid Hour. My name is Steve Mathis. You can find me on Twitter at Judge Mathis, joined as always by my co-host Dave Tilton. You can find him on Twitter at Tilt Money. Together, we are the Bills guys. This is the Air Raid Hour. We are on time today, no technical issues, and we are presented by the Cover One Sports Network. And we've made it, people. Football is back. The Buffalo Bills in their short shorts take the field tomorrow for OTAs. Man, it's just I need real football to be back. I'm just in like this. What's the word I'm looking for? Just like this melancholy wasteland where I feel nothing right now without actual football. I just walk around every day in a lackadaisical just fog.
The the time between when the draft ends and when training camp starts is
Brutal.
it's sad. It's sad. But like you have said, you're gonna kind of like focus on yourself a little bit. Like maybe
Yeah, I'm
maybe I
drinking.
try to get out there and exercise a little bit more. I'm
I'm
gonna try
drinking
to
water infused with lemon right now. I haven't had a drink in like 6 days.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to really spend the next couple months doing the same because it's when you have a kid and you spend so much energy on taking care of your kid, and then you work and you do like it's hard to focus on yourself once
Yeah.
you have a kid.
What
It
what does
really
your
is.
wife feel about the dad bod? Is she okay with the dad
Um,
bod?
she's okay with it. I'm not a big guy by nature, right? It's more just like toning than anything.
Yeah.
So like I'm just like it's more about just us
It was
getting
a
rid of the roundness here.
it was really a magical it was a really a magical summer, that one summer that dad bods were in. It was a great summer. Anyway, so starting just to start off the show today, we always like to like have some kind of like topic before we get into the main topic, which tonight is going to be NFC North offseason review.
Mhm.
Jason Taylor comes in and says the USFL is not good enough for you. One of the former Buffalo Bill for like a week before he decided to retire. Ike Brown had like 2 interceptions for the New Orleans Breakers this past weekend. That was the only USFL clip I've watched since the first week of the season. So I'm really just counting down the days really till the XFL next year, because I think they'll actually have some legitimate football going on. But I'll tell you what, we like to have these topics to start the show, and I was searching up and down Twitter, just scrolling and scrolling. I'm like, I need to find a jabroni of the week. We need to lead it off with the jabroni of the week. And I'll tell you what, since our last show, I don't think anyone's done anything stupid. Like, no one's done anything stupid. No one's like tweeted anything stupid in relation to sort of this show, like the Buffalo
Yeah.
Bills. So, you know, you know what they say, if you can't think of someone, it's probably because that person is you. So maybe we're the jabronis of the week. And I'm looking around. You got Kendall spending his weekends with Anthony, playing Madden. I saw our boy Zbot and the Fanatics guys up there at the West Hurt interviewing Buffalo Bills players. You got Matt Perino tweeting out their schedule for OTA breakdown day 1. And what are we doing? Well, we're doing the Lord's work today, ladies and gentlemen, of breaking down the NFC North. So over the next hour, we are going to be discussing, probably for 20, 30 minutes at a time, really important topics like Kirk Cousins. What are your thoughts on Kirk Cousins? And Justin Jefferson versus Stephon Diggs. Who won the trade? Are you prepared for this next
Yeah.
hour and these engrossing Buffalo Bills topics?
Well, I mean this show does have a special place for me, being as my wife's side of the family is all Packers
Yeah.
fans, as the audience knows. So there's there's some things I'll get off my chest when we get to the Packers, but it's an interesting division, and I'll say that this division potentially gives us a chance to get some, I don't want to call them easy wins, but like you look at the schedule just starting out and
Mhm.
you're like, you just pick out the Bears and Lions and you're like, other than that, the schedule is not that easy for the Bills. So we talk about the NFC
Yeah.
North. It'll be fun when we end up power ranking these teams, because I'm curious,
Mhm.
very curious to see your order. I have an idea of what my order is going to
I
be.
mean,
So
the top
yeah.
2, Green Bay and Minnesota, like frighten me. Detroit's got some talent, but I still think that they're a year away, and Chicago might be the easiest team on our schedule this year. I mean, I have one page of notes for each of the teams that we're going to talk about tonight.
Mm,
And the Chicago Bears added so many had so many just dart throws in free
yep.
agency and the draft that like they almost took up a whole page just listing the free agents and draft picks. Chicago is in a full scale rebuild, and I have some choice words for their general manager when we get to them. Pops Mafia says Feliciano said some pretty stupid stuff. We led last show with that, so we can't go talking about John
Can't recycle
Feliciano
that.
2 shows in a row. Can't recycle. It's the off season, but we can't repeat. So I think off season you can't repeat. But even though I think like 2 seasons ago, I think we discussed Cody Ford and whether he'd be like a future starting guard on every single show we did for a solid like 2.5 months. But anyway, the Bills schedule versus the NFC North this year. We're playing the NFC North, all four teams, 4 games against the NFC North, and it doesn't kick off until the second really half of the season. Week 8, after our bye week, we play the Green Bay Packers at 8:20 on NBC at Sunday Night Football. Week 10, 2 weeks later, we play the Minnesota Vikings 1 p.m. on Fox. 2 weeks later, we play the Detroit Lions at 12:30 on CBS. That is a Thanksgiving game. And then week 16, I guess the NFC North is the Buffalo Bills holiday opponent this year because we are at the Chicago Bears at 1 p.m. on CBS Christmas Eve. Even though there is a little asterisk next to that one, it could be flexed to Christmas Day, even though I doubt it. I really doubt it. But I will say crazier things have happened. The Chicago Bears have 3 primetime games this year. 1 Thursday night, 1 Saturday night, 1 Sunday night, 1 Monday night. And I saw that and I'm like, the Jets and the Giants got 1 game each and the Bears are getting 3. Like, I understand market, but I saw that and I was like, what?
That's purely Justin Fields. That's the only reason.
Watching
Chicago
watching
plus
him run in
Justin
circles.
Fields. Yeah, the Bears have, I mean, even before they haven't been good really for, I mean, they made the playoffs, I understand, against the Eagles a couple years ago when Matt Nagy's sort of beginner's luck got them into the playoffs, and Khalil Mack. But they really are just not one, like, to me, they're one of the least entertaining teams to watch in the entire league. And that's before even what happened this offseason. They're just not a fun team to watch.
Douglas Masters comes in and says the Bears will probably be drafting in the top 5 next year. John Herring says, what have the Bears done to deserve that? Like, I thought he meant our bashing of them. I think he actually means the schedule.
Yes.
I think that they are the worst team in football. I think that they might be the worst. Them and the Texans, I think, might be the 2 worst teams in football. I guess I'm not going to sit here and I've only really looked in depth at the Bills opponents. I haven't gone through the depth charts of like the whole league. But I mean, I just know the Falcons are going to be up there. Houston's going to be up there, and the Bears have to be up there. Their offensive line, when we get to it, I mean, unless they have some kind of savant offensive line coach, that is just absolutely ugly what they're putting in front of Justin Fields. But putting the cart ahead of the horse, because we're going in order here. So we're going to start with the team that we see first, the team that we see on Sunday Night Football after our bye week, and that is the Green Bay Packers. So just like we have for all of our shows, we're going to go through the coaching staff, the moves they made in free agency, what they did in the draft. We're going to walk through the depth chart, both on offense, defense, and special teams. And we're just going to give our thoughts on the team in general and our thoughts on how the Bills stack up against these teams. I will say this, when we are talking about all of these NFC North teams, we don't play them till the second half of the season. So while we're giving some sort of, we're having this abstract conversation about what their depth chart looks like, etc. Injuries do happen in the National Football League, and things could drastically change by the time we see any 4 of these opponents after midseason. But we're starting with the Green Bay Packers here. Their coaching staff, Matt LaFleur is their head coach. They lost Nathaniel Hackett to Denver. They lost then QB coach to the Bears, and they now have Adam Stenavich stepping in as offensive coordinator. Joe Barry returns in there as their defensive coordinator, and Rich Bisaccia enters Green Bay as their special teams coordinator. That's a low-key little pickup for them. He's a very good special teams coordinator. But the Packers, all of their money was spent on Aaron Rodgers this offseason because their free agent list is Sammy Watkins, Jerron Reed, and Pat O'Donnell, the puncher. But this isn't really a team that really needed to add free agents. I mean, they're kind of like the Buffalo Bills, where for the most part that roster was pretty set.
Their roster was set, but obviously you have the huge departure, right, with the trade of Davante Adams, which I guess we'll lump into the free agency kind of talk here. But I mean, this team goes as far as Aaron Rodgers takes them every year. This is starting to feel a little bit like the bizarro Patriots in a way, right? You had all those years where Tom Brady kind of like took less money so that the Patriots could sign guys, and then the Packers are kind of like the opposite right now. Like all the money's funneling into Aaron Rodgers, and they really don't have a ton of capital to spend on free agency. Now, I know the loss of Davante Adams is massive, but like this team is still very good. They're still probably, I mean, they're definitely still the betting favorite to win the North, but from a free agency standpoint, it was basically nothing. I mean, like, yes, I know they signed Jaron Reed, but like basically nothing in free agency for this team. They traded Davante Adams and said, we're going on to the draft, right? We're moving on to the draft. So free agency, sorry, Packers fans, but I mean, it was not, it was not pretty. And I will say that in talking to Packers fans, close ones that I have in my family, their expectations for free agency were pretty low. So I do think that there was a level of expectation. I think for most reasonable Packers fans realized that free agency wasn't going to be big for them. It was going to be about what happened with Aaron Rodgers' future. Because remember, there was a time where however close it was or not, we'll never really know. But there was a lot of smoke around him, like not playing for them this year. So you got like your guy back, which wasn't like a free agent signing, but man, that's number one.
Yeah. And we got Pops Mafia coming in saying, what did they get for Davante Adams? They traded Davante Adams for the 22nd overall pick in the draft in the first round and the 53rd overall pick in the second round. So a first and a second round pick. That is it. Those picks turned into Quay Walker, inside linebacker, and Christian Watson, the wide receiver out of North Dakota State. So you're really hoping that Christian Watson, one of the more higher ceiling, but unproven wide receivers in that NFL draft, turns into something. But you look at that wide receiver room, we're going to get to it in a moment. It's a rather unproven wide receiver room. And I don't know, what were your thoughts on this entire Aaron Rodgers situation this offseason too? Because Aaron Rodgers, year after year after year, Aaron Rodgers is just who Aaron Rodgers is. But everyone's always kind of like, man, I feel bad for that guy. The Packers always screw him over. They don't draft a wide receiver in the first round, which they didn't again, even though that really wasn't their fault. The board fell terribly for them. Or they don't do this, they don't do that. And what do here? Aaron Rodgers takes all the money, and then they're forced to trade Davante Adams, even though Aaron Rodgers said he knew it was happening. Like, the whole situation was just super weird to me.
It is weird. The Tilton
what does your wife think about that?
She's over him. I'm not gonna like, my wife watches a lot of football. She knows football very well. She's over Aaron Rodgers. I mean, she doesn't realize, I think, how spoiled the Packers have been between Favre and Rodgers, but like she's over him. Like she was ready to kind of like give Jordan Love a chance or find the next guy. Like she was over his like whole persona and his whole the whole like kind of aura around him. But then my wife's brother was like, look, we have no choice. Like, if you are the Packers and you let Aaron Rodgers out the door, like you're going to deal with the backlash of dealing with that is going to be more so than what you're dealing with now, which is the trade of Davante Adams. So split a little bit, I think, on opinion.
I'm we're not going to talk about this team because they're not playing the Bills this year, but I wonder what Seahawks fans are going to feel like if, God forbid, Russell Wilson's hoisting a Lombardi at the end of the season. Well, obviously we as Bills fans don't want that, but if the Broncos find a lot of success over the next 2-3 years, like, Seahawks fans are going to be not in a good place. So yeah, I think I'm leaning towards the way that your brother-in-law is leaning. Like, you just can't get rid of, like, when you have a franchise quarterback like that, who's still an MVP candidate year after year, like, you just, like,
you always have a chance.
You're always, yeah.
I
and you're
mean,
just almost at his will.
you're at his will, and you kind of think about. I mean, the Seahawks went through this with Russell Wilson a bit. They were
Mm,
still a playoff team when their team got it around him. Look at the Saints, right? Not
mhm,
that Drew Brees like had the same kind of attitude as Aaron Rodgers, but like there were some lean years that the Saints had from a personnel perspective around Drew Brees, but they always had Drew Brees, so they always had a
mhm,
chance. Now there were years they didn't make the playoffs, or the years they weren't that good. But when you go into the season with Drew Brees, or when you go into the season with Aaron Rodgers, that is your number one chance to be a Super Bowl contender versus the alternative.
mhm.
So I think it ultimately was the right decision for them as an organization, but it definitely cripples you in other ways.
And we're gonna get to the depth chart in a moment, but this is a team that had a lot of quality draft picks, like high-end draft picks,
Mhm.
and guys who are gonna step in, and maybe they're not starters, but they could contribute right away on a football team that is clearly with an older quarterback in Aaron Rodgers in a win now mode. They took 2 bona fide plug and play defensive players from the University of Georgia to start the draft in the first round in Quay Walker and Devontae Wyatt. Then they followed up in the second round with Christian Watson and Sean Ryan. Then they followed up with another wide receiver, Romeo Dubs. They took my guy, Zach Tom, the offensive tackle from Wake Forest, Kingsley Enagbare, the edge rusher from South Carolina, Tariq Carpenter, the safety, Jonathan Ford, the defensive tackle, Rasheed Walker, the offensive tackle, and then another one of my favorites, Samari Toure, the wide receiver from Nebraska. So they, again, kind of throwing darts. Christian Watson, Romeo Dubs, Samari Toure. They're adding a bunch of younger wide receivers to this wide receiver room that sort of, they lost St. Brown. They lost Devontae Adams. They're adding Watkins. They're getting Amari Rodgers back, and they're adding 3 more rookies. What are your thoughts on just the Green Bay Packers draft class in general?
I like the draft class, right? I think that you lose a guy like Zadarius Smith in the offseason, and you bring in a guy like Quay Walker, who in a 3-4 kind of fits in nicely in the middle there. And as Kendall, had sort of analyzed in the pre-draft process along with others at Cover One, I mean, Quay Walker was a good blitzer, right?
Mhm.
So you think about you're replacing some of what you lost with Zadarius Smith, obviously not to that level necessarily right away, but you get a guy like Quay Walker, Devontae Wyatt, plugging him in probably as a 3-4 end in that line. It's a good move. We know Devontae Wyatt was pretty versatile in where he
Mhm.
lined up with Georgia, so I like that move as well. And going on the offensive lineman, Zach Tom, Sean Ryan, that's a nice
Mhm.
those are nice reserves. The Packers already have a very good offensive line, but
Yep.
we've seen that offensive line go through some
Mhm.
injuries the last few years, and there's been some mixing and matching there. But Christian Watson is the big one, right? Because
Yeah.
he's the wild card that could make or break their draft class.
Mhm.
You look at, you know, they drafted Dubs fine, but like there's not an alpha anymore in that room to bring these guys along, unless you consider that to be Sammy Watkins
Mhm.
as a vet. But like you always had Devontae Adams and then
Yeah.
a bunch of guys around him who didn't have a ton of pressure on him necessarily because Devontae Adams was getting fed. Now we talked a lot about how, okay, the Packers need more receivers, but you always had the one guy who was the alpha in the room. Now
Mhm.
is Christian Watson going to be that guy of this draft
Yeah.
class? Like wild card for me. And then the
Mhm.
rest of the guys you mentioned, Dubs, I liked obviously in the pre-draft. Torre, you liked, and so I liked their mix of guys that they
Mhm.
got, but there's a big glaring question around what Christian Watson will
Yeah.
become. I think.
Charles G comes in and says, "Where do those 170 targets go?" Let's start off by taking a look at this Green Bay Packers depth chart. You have Aaron
Mhm.
Rodgers, obviously at the helm at quarterback. I think you're going to see there might not be 170 targets to go around because Matt LaFleur, came from that Tennessee offense previously with Derrick Henry, comes from that Kyle Shanahan type of system. You could see more of an emphasis on running the ball, like more leaning into the running game. Aaron Jones, AJ Dillon, they have Kylan Hill as well, who's coming off an ACL tear. But then you look at the receivers. You mentioned it's sort of I look at I don't know how the step chart is going to shake out by the time we get to week 8 and the Buffalo Bills play the Green Bay Packers. I think Robert Tonyan will be back. He's probably not going to start the season for them after tearing his ACL. So they'll probably be going early on the season with Josiah DeGuara, Mercedes Lewis, who aren't pass catchers. They're blockers. Then you got Christian
Mhm.
Watson. Alan Lazard, Sammy Watkins, Romeo Dubs, Samari Toure. Those are sort of the boundary options, even though some of them can obviously play slot as well. And then you got sort of Randall Cobb and Amari Rogers, who's a running back / wide receiver, working the slot there. So just a ton of darts. Like, who knows how it's sort of all gonna play out by the time we get to week 8. And then the offensive line is another one of their strengths. David Bakhtiari, John Runyon, Josh Myers, Royce Newman, Elgin Jenkins, left to right. Then the depth, which they've drafted over the last couple of years. Zach Tom, Sean Ryan, Cole Van Lannon. They even have Nijman, who started a ton of games at left tackle for them last year. Then they have starters who are good and they have backups who are good along that offensive line. I mean, I look at this Green Bay Packers offense and I think run and play action centric offense because the running backs and the offensive line are a strength. I don't know what their wide receiver room or their receiver room in general, their target share is going to look like by week 8. And that's what's so weird to me. I feel like Green Bay has an elite quarterback with an offense catered to a mediocre quarterback. Does that make sense? Like, this doesn't seem like the offense that you give an elite quarterback.
You've got a great offensive line, good running backs, and suspect wide receivers, right? Like, I mean, it seems very odd. I think that, I mean, who, like, is Alan Lazard right now penciled in as kind of the number one? Like, that is scary to me for a guy like Aaron Rodgers, who we know kind of has the reputation of like getting on his receivers when they're like not in the right place or when they drop passes. Like, this is going to be some growing pains, I think, with this group. Now, I will say there is some potential with the group, right? You've got Amari Rogers coming into his second year. Can he be more of an offensive weapon for you this year after really pretty much just being a return man last year? Romeo Dubs, drafted him in the 4th round. Could he make the team and make an impact in year 1? Christian Watson, like, how much does Randall Cobb have left in the tank? I guess Randall Cobb, now that I think about it, he's kind of going to be the veteran in the room that maybe brings these guys along. But like, Amari Rogers needs to be in that guy's hip pocket like all summer.
Yeah.
And really all of the guys do.
He is and he isn't, I think, an X factor for that team. Like, if they do go run heavy, he could sort of play like an Isaiah McKenzie role where he slides into the backfield as a receiver / running back. And obviously you're going to want him to usurp Randall Cobb on the depth chart as your go-to wide receiver number 3. But it's definitely going to be interesting to see, like, are you going to see a lot of like Mercedes Lewis, Josiah DeGuara, sort of a lot of 12 personnel, a lot of sort of trying to manufacture guys open with things like play action and rollouts, etc. It almost seems like this is an offense that's going to be built on getting quality passes more than throwing a quantity of passes, if that makes any sense. Like, they're going to be looking to manufacture their shots, because I don't think that they have the firepower, at least in the wide receiver core, I don't think Aaron Rodgers has got the talent to drop back and throw the ball 50 times. I don't think he does.
I mean, could this be a like Seattle offense like we've seen from like when they had like Schottenheimer as their host, like took their deep shots, took their shots with play action Russell Wilson, but really leaned on, like, I don't know. Like, there are a few teams out there that you can say like, okay, elite quarterback, but like they didn't necessarily have a high volume passing attack. And that is a team like the Seahawks from a few years ago and others, but like, it's not, it's weird though to me. It is weird.
Like, are they seriously going to pay Aaron Rodgers the money they paid him and then treat him like Ryan Tannehill when Matt LaFleur was in Tennessee?
They can't.
I'm absolutely baffled by it.
Maybe they lean into Aaron Jones a little bit more as a receiver too, and like use him and AJ Dillon at the same time.
And that's what I'm saying too, like that manufacturing stuff, like screen passes, guys out of the backfield, things of that nature, non-traditional sort of passing plays. One thing I will say before we move on to the defense here, Joe Biscaglia did an article for The Athletic where he sort of did an early 53-man roster projection. And one of the things that he wrote, I don't want to spoil the whole article, you can go and read it, but one of the things he said was like the Bills will cut Jake Kumaro in order to put Trey White on the PUP list, and then they'll bring Jake Kumaro back since he's a vested veteran. I don't know if I would cut Jake Kumaro if you want to keep Jake Kumaro, because I feel like Aaron Rodgers has probably got like the ESPN alert on his phone for Jake Kumaro.
Jake Kumaro alerts.
And if Jake Kumaro does get released by the Buffalo Bills, even if it is for a day, I feel like Aaron Rodgers might, call him up and offer him part of his weekly paycheck to come back to Green Bay. That's the state of sort of the wide receiving core there for the Green Bay Packers. But looking at their defense, this is where the Green Bay Packers, I think, are going to win games. I mean, this is a good defense.
Yeah, it is.
Their defensive line is scary. Dean Lowry, Kenny Clark, Devontae Wyatt, Jerron Reed, Tedderell Slayton, Jack Heflin. Like, they got some bullies up front along the defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
They obviously have Preston Smith rushing off the edge, Rashawn Gary. They're adding Kingsley and Agbury. So not deep in terms of guys they can rotate in and out, but there are some dudes who can get to the quarterback, and guys like Preston Smith, Rashawn Gary, and then Devontae Wyatt and Kenny Clark as well. Linebacker, you have Quay Walker, Devondre Campbell, who stepped up in a big way last year. At corner, you have Jair Alexander coming back, Rasul Douglas, Eric Stokes, 3 solid corners to go along with Darnell Savage and Adrian Amos, who are 2 really good safeties. I mean, just a really intimidating front, above average edge rushers, quality linebackers, and name players in the secondary. I mean, this defense has it all. They're going to be the Packers' strength this year. This is what's going to win them football games.
It is. And you start going down the starters, right? Kenny Clark, first round pick in 2016. Devontae Wyatt, first round pick 22. Quay Walker, first round pick 22. Rashawn Gary, first round pick 2019. Eric Stokes, first round pick 2021. Savage, first round pick 2019. Jair Alexander, first round pick 2018. You have a lot of names, first round pick investments in this defense, all of which were, by the way, drafted by the Packers. So, I mean, you've got a big investment made on that defense, which has been like quietly, like sneakily good, and could be like even really, really good this year. And how about Rashawn Gary off the edge, who like we were kind of like, and I don't know how good he's going to be.
He stepped up.
And because we were kind of like lukewarm on him in 2019, I remember, and he's really stepped up for them. Quay Walker blitzing now as well, potentially up the middle, replacing what Zadarius Smith left. Devontae Wyatt added to the mix. Like, I think this defense has a chance to be really good. Their depth is like a little bit questionable in some areas, but that starting unit looks really strong and is maybe sneakily one of the better starting units in the entire league, honestly.
Yeah, in terms of pass rusher, linebacker, and even in the secondary, you don't see a lot of name depth players, but not everyone can be the Buffalo Bills and have a name, back up at every position. I say that in jest, but Dilly Dale comes in and says people counting out the Packers for some reason. They'll make it to the playoffs, then blow it. I'll tell you what, like we've sort of been critical of the Green Bay Packers here, but at the end of the day, like
they're still the best team in the division.
They're the best team in the NFC North. They're my pick to win the NFC North. But they might get a push from the next team we're going to talk about. But before that, their special teams, Mason Crosby comes back. He'll probably have a better year because Corey Bojorquez is no longer holding for him. They added Pat O'Donnell from the Bears in free agency. And then their return man is Amari Rodgers out of Clemson, their 3rd round pick, who needs to step up and become sort of an Isaiah McKenzie type of legitimate utility player for them this season. And the OTA meter is out in full swing. The guys looking good, looking fresh, shedded some pounds, blah, blah, all that stuff you hear this time of year. There's a couple of tweets about Amari Rodgers in that vein that I saw on social media this week. Working hard, gym rat.
No fat Eddie Lacy picks.
No fat Eddie Lacy picks. On to the Minnesota Vikings now, which is one of those rare teams that the Bills see in 2022 that's making a coaching change. Obviously the Bears as well, when we talk about them in a little bit, but the Minnesota Vikings have a change to their coaching staff after years and years and years of Mike Zimmer. You are seeing an offensive mind take charge in Minnesota. Kevin O'Connell, the former Washington assistant who worked under Sean McVay and then sort of followed him to the LA Rams. He wasn't a play caller in LA, but he was a play caller in Washington. His previous stop before that. His offensive coordinator is Wes Phillips. The defensive coordinator is veteran defensive mind Ed Donatel, and their special teams coordinator is Matt Daniels. So what do you think, Kevin O'Connell? Is he up to the challenge of being an NFL head coach?
I was a fan of the hire. I liked Kevin O'Connell as one of the kind of up and comers during when all the teams were kind of going through head coaching searches. I thought, there might have been a chance he could end up as the Bills offensive coordinator if they didn't want to
Mhm.
go in the direction of Ken Dorsey. Obviously coming from that Sean McVay system, hasn't had a ton of chances to call plays, but he did call plays in the preseason for them, so he's got a little bit of experience. I like the hire. It feels very much like a guy that came from Minnesota who's now coaching the
Mhm.
Cleveland Browns and Stefanski. It kind of has that kind of feel
Yeah.
to me.
And I
And
almost feel like the Vikings sort of needed that jolt, right? Like Mike Zimmer is a defensive guy.
yeah,
It got a little boring there at the a little stale. I don't know if it's going to be something that can be sustained, but I like the sort of like instant jolt that you're going to get from the instant rush you're going to get from
yep.
hiring a creative offensive mind like
I
Kevin O'Connell.
mean, you go in the complete opposite direction than what you had with Mike Zimmer, right?
Mhm.
Old school guy, defensive guy. You're going in the total opposite direction where your team has been good, but you've been kind of sort of running in neutral for the past couple
Mhm.
years, right? You were 8-9 a year ago. You've been kind of like in the playoffs here and there. I mean, I know they beat the Saints on the road a couple years ago. There's like kind of a shining moment for Kirk Cousins, but ultimately, like that team reflected Mike Zimmer, right? Like steady, not spectacular,
Mhm.
kind of just like running in neutral. So they went for the jolt, and I like that approach. I think the Vikings have a chance to be better than they were last year with that coaching staff, but um and I also don't necessarily know that, like, what I'm trying to figure out is how much pressure should be on Kevin O'Connell year 1, because they do have a pretty good
Yeah.
roster, but like where do you see how much pressure do you think is on him in year 1?
I don't know if it's so much pressure, but I think the expectation has to be playoffs. The NFC is not as tough as the AFC. And I look at this roster on paper, and I think the expectation for this team has to be the playoffs. Like
Yeah.
I don't know if that means it's pressure for Kevin O'Connell. Like I certainly don't think like if he goes 7 and whatever you go in the NFL, no 7 and 10. Like I don't think like he'll be on the hot seat, or Minnesota fans will start calling for his head or calling his hiring a mistake. But I look at this roster, I look at the NFC, and I think at least I don't know if I would say the expectation has to be in some way, shape, or form a postseason berth.
Yeah, I agree with that. I agree that as we're about
Mm,
to go through their roster, I think their
yeah,
roster is certainly good enough for
I,
that.
and I love what they did in free agency. Like they weren't splashy, but they obviously added Chris Reed and Jesse Davis, two veteran depth pieces to the offensive line. So to help them in case of injury, that offensive line always seems to be banged up year after year after year. And then they added three pieces on defense that were really interesting. Former Buffalo Bill, fan favorite, Walter Payton Man of the Year, Harrison Phillips is now a Minnesota Viking. They added Zadarius Smith, the pass rusher, to go across from Danielle Hunter. And they added a really solid, underrated, underutilized in his time in Arizona veteran linebacker in Jordan Hicks. And then we're going to get to their draft in a moment. They had a ton of draft picks. They traded back a lot.
Dalvin Tomlinson too, don't
Yeah,
forget.
I believe Tomlinson was already on their roster, but I couldn't be wrong. I'm 95% sure he was on their team
He
last year.
might
He
have
just
been.
might have gotten hurt. But yeah, they're stout up front along the defensive line there. So just a really solid, I think, solid but unspectacular. One of those free agencies you look back at the end of the 2022 season, you're like, yeah, those guys all played a role and they helped us get to the postseason. Like it wasn't flashy at the time, but I really like all those moves.
I love the moves they made. I mean,
Mhm,
they went and said, like, where are we really lacking? They were definitely lacking
mhm,
on the interior of the defensive line, which for this team for a long time was like one of their defensive line has kind of been one of their calling cards in years past, and they retooled it, right? Um, and so I like what they did there. Patrick Peterson coming in as a free agent as well, along like with you said as with Jordan Hicks, so a couple of former Arizona guys there, um, and like you said, they went out and they got some nice depth pieces on the offensive line with Reed and Schlottman. So their offensive line now kind of has some safety nets underneath it behind their top guys who are still all like their main guys they're counting on are all pretty young relatively, right? So I
mhm.
like what they did as far as the approach and kind of shoring up some of the depth and also obviously addressing defensive line heavily. So Zadarius Smith is going to be an X
Yeah,
factor. I think like
him and
with
Danielle Hunter.
him and Daniil Hunter, I mean, we remember for a long time, Anthony Barr with the Vikings and kind of him being their sort of pass rushing guy. Like Zadarius Smith is now going to be that guy for them to go along with Danielle Hunter as well. And they still obviously have Eric Kendricks in the middle. So yeah, I like this roster a lot. Like to me, can it all come together with some of these new pieces and new coaching staff is going to be the question. But I do like what they did in free agency.
And you look at their draft too, like early on in the draft, added Lewis Seen, who I think could be a plug and play safety for them, even though they do have some good safeties there in Smith and Bynum. Andrew Booth Jr., depending on sort of his injuries and stuff, that's a plug and play CB2 opposite Patrick Peterson. Maybe even Andrew Booth Jr. is their CB1, really. He's their alpha CB by the end of the year. They added Ed Ingram, who, we were big fans of. He had that checkered past, but he won the Offensive Lineman of the Week at the Senior Bowl. He's plug and play guard for them. We thought they had a plug and play guard in Wyatt Davis, and he's like, they're on the depth chart now. We might have to have a conversation about what happened to Wyatt Davis. They added Brian Asamoah, Caleb Evans, two guys who could develop into starting caliber players. They added Atamu to that defensive line. Ty Chandler, one of our favorites, to a team that already has 3 running backs. They had a 4th. And then they added some quality players later in Vidarian Lowe, Jalen Naylor, who might even get some snaps for them with their depth at wide receiver, and Nick Muse, who might actually get some snaps for them and play for them with their depth at tight end. So I think they had an absolutely killer draft in Minnesota.
Absolutely love the draft. Seen in Booth, obviously, Booth dropping for the medicals, but like you can't he got to a point where you were just like, whoever is going to draft this guy is going to get a huge bargain. And then they went ahead and hedged their bets by drafting a Caleb Evans in the 4th round. Right. So, I also think like sneaky good pick Brian Asamoah to stick behind Eric Kendricks to learn from him. Really good pick. And then an eye on the future a little bit too, maybe with Ty Chandler, maybe coming in and if Alexander Madison isn't there after this year, I believe he's a free agent after this year, if I'm not mistaken, then Ty Chandler's kind of waiting in the wings there. Someone can fact check me on that Madison contract, but I believe it's his last year on his deal. So love their draft. I mean, these were all guys that I would have been like, a lot of these guys I've been happy with the Bills drafting, right? So then I didn't even talk about Jalen Naylor, who's a guy that could maybe even make a year 1 impact as well. They obviously drafted Smith Marset last year. So they have a pretty deep receiving group now too with these recent draft picks. So I like the draft. I really do.
I mean, I'm going to roll. We'll go through the depth chart, but I think unlike Green Bay, I just kind of want to go position by position here. And I want to start with the quarterback, because I think this is the one team where we need to just stop and have a conversation strictly about the quarterback. Like, we know who Aaron Rodgers is. We sort of know who Jared Goff is, and I don't even know if he'll be playing by the time we play the Lions on Thanksgiving. Chicago Bears, Justin Fields, we don't know what he is, but we know what he doesn't have surrounding him. And then you have sort of Kirk Cousins, who's got Justin Jefferson, who's got Adam Thielen, he's got Delvin Cook and Alexander Madison and a solid offensive line. Like Kirk Cousins, people were starting to have this conversation in the comment section. Fill in the blank. Kirk Cousins is a top blank quarterback. Like, where does he fit? Sort of
top
in
15,
the,
I would say. Top 15.
Yeah.
Maybe. I mean, right on the fringe of top 15, I would say.
I'm looking through, and I should have probably done a little bit more research prior to the show. I'm trying to look through like team quarterbacks I'd rather have than Kirk Cousins. Josh Allen, that's one. Lamar, we put Lamar ahead of Kirk Cousins.
Yeah, I would rather have Lamar.
I'm gonna put Lamar. Joe Burrow, that's 3.
Yep.
Deshaun Watson, that's 4.
Mahomes,
Ryan,
Herbert, that's
Matt
2
Ryan. Matt Ryan, probably not, right?
No,
Tannehill, probably not anymore.
No.
Russell Wilson.
Yep.
Justin Herbert, Patrick Mahomes. Yep. I'm now up to 8, or I'm up to 7, excuse me. Derek Carr. I'd rather have Derek Carr than Kirk Cousins.
I would rather have Derek Carr. Yeah.
So that's 8. Dak Prescott. I'd rather have Dak Prescott than Kirk Cousins.
Yep.
9.
Dak.
Yep. Daniel Jones, no. Jalen Hurts, no. Carson Wentz, hell no. Justin Fields, no. Jared Goff, no. Aaron Rodgers, we're now at 10. Atlanta, Marcus Mariota, no. Carolina, Sam Darnold, no. Jameis Winston, no. Tom Brady, we're at 11. Kyler Murray, we're at 12. Matthew Stafford, we're at 13. I don't think we're going to put Jimmy Garoppolo over Trey Lance. So 14, yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head. top 15,
He's just
10 to
inside the
15.
top 15, I'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean,
Which is, I mean,
you
that's
could
still good.
people smarter than us could sit here and have a conversation about whether maybe he's the ninth best. Is he better than Derek Carr? Like, I'm just gonna humbly admit that I have not watched enough
I
Kirk Cousins and Derek Carr to have that conversation.
I think but what you just did pretty
Mhm.
clearly illustrates, I think, that he's firmly inside like the top 15 or
Yeah.
right around
Oh
the
yeah,
top 15.
100%.
So
And
like,
that's a quarterback with the roster around him. We're going to get to the rest of the roster here. You need to make the playoffs with a quarterback like that and a roster like if you put Christian or if you put Kirk Cousins on remember that Bills roster years under like when Jim's defensive coordinator and Doug Marrone was like, man, if only we had a quarterback. We're stuck with Kyle Orton. And everyone's like, the Bills have the best roster in football except one position. If you put Kirk Cousins on that team, they're a playoff team, right? So that's sort of, I think, the conversation you got to have with Minnesota is just the talent is there at every other position, really. Like, so if you have a top 15 quarterback, and most of the quarterbacks we listed were in the AFC, the Vikings have to make the
but
playoffs this year.
yeah, I mean, the thing with Kirk Cousins is like, I mean, you mentioned Matt Ryan. Like he has that kind of Matt Ryan vibe where
Mhm.
he's like a really good statistical regular season quarterback, but like, do you trust a guy like Matt Ryan in the playoffs? I mean, I know the Falcons made it to the Super Bowl that one year, but like he gives me that kind of feeling, like great regular season quarterback. He can probably
Mm,
get you to the playoffs, but like, is he going to have that it factor that can take
yeah.
you all the way? I'm not so
And
sure.
and Walter comes in and says, "Then why are fans so desperate to move off him? Fans don't lie. It's just you trust the fan base over the stat sheet." I'm not saying there's anything wrong about what you're saying, but at the same time, now that they sort of have this shot of adrenaline, right? Like like an EpiPen shot into the thigh with Kevin O'Connell, like Mike Zimmer, who knows, maybe Mike Zimmer was the issue, right? So now maybe you have sort of this shot of adrenaline, coursing through your team's veins because of Kevin O'Connell that really could jumpstart. And I'm not saying that's going to turn Kirk Cousins into a Super Bowl winning quarterback and he should be the answer, the long-term answer for that football team. I'm not saying that, but he could make him maybe less of a polarizing figure amongst the Minnesota Vikings fan base, at least for 2022. Because I look at the rest of this depth chart. Dalvin Cook, Alexander Madison. They got I can't even pronounce his name. Wangu, the kick returner / running back from Iowa State. They got Ty Chandler, so they're rolling 4 deep at running back. They got Justin Jefferson, one of the best receivers in the league. Adam Thielen, a crafty vet, and then they got 4 other guys who are competing for the other snaps in KJ Osborne, a talented young player, BZ Johnson, Jalen Naylor, and Smith Marset, who me and you both loved in last year's draft class. And then hopefully he stays healthy. They got Irv Smith as well. So just a ton of weapons there in Minnesota. And on top of that, a really solid offensive line.
Yep.
If I would say some of these younger guys continue to develop left to right, they got Christian Darrisaw, high draft pick, Ezra Cleveland, high draft pick, Garrett Bradbury, high draft pick, right guard. They're probably going to rock Ed Ingram, high draft pick, and then Brian O'Neill, along with Jesse Davis, Chris Reed, and Wyatt Davis for depth. So a solid offensive line. I look at this football
Solid
team.
offensive line. I mean,
Yeah,
every one of those guys on the offensive line was either a first or second round pick.
yeah. I
So
don't know if O'Neill was, but yeah, the rest of them
yeah,
definitely
second
were.
round in 2018.
Oh, was he really? Okay, so I,
Yeah,
I stayed. Yeah, there. But we've seen the Dolphins like that can backfire. But
it can, but
these guys have also shown more promise than those Dolphins players ever showed.
yep.
Mhm. And looking, and again, not to read too much into OTA reports, but again, that shot of adrenaline that Kevin O'Connell could bring, 11 personnel, spread them out to run. Dalvin Cook's been lining up a ton at receiver. So you have like a bunch formation with Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, and Adam Thielen on one side. You got Alexander Madison in the backfield. Like that's a lot for a defense to think about. And on top of that, like in chunks, guys like Ty Chandler, KJ Osborne, Jalen Naylor, Smith Marset, KJ Osborne, BC Johnson, you got the ball in their hands. All of those guys can sort of make plays. So there's just and Irv Smith is sort of the wild card in all this, like just a ton of different options for this offense to function at a very high level.
Yeah, and they went after, I mean, they were clearly they're clearly comfortable with kind of being in that position where Irv Smith is the guy. They lost Tyler
Mhm.
Conklin in free agency and really didn't do anything to, to replace him. So they're banking on Irv Smith being the guy at tight end. But like you said, this could be a very wide receiver and running back centric offense anyway. In a way that's kind of opposite of the Packers, right?
Mhm.
Where they, they didn't really have a ton. Like you could now with Devontae Adams gone, like the Vikings have the best, I think,
Yeah.
offensive personnel in the division.
Mhm. They have the
Easily,
best offense in the division outside of quarterback. Yeah. Yeah.
right outside of quarterback, but like skill position wise, I think top to bottom
Mhm.
they have the best in the
Yeah.
division.
Ralph Wilson Sr. coming in from the beyond saying that the roster's so good. Why fire Rick Spielman? I mean, listen, it's there's something to be said about sometimes a message just gets stale, whether it's Rick Spielman or it's Mike Zimmer. Sometimes
I
you
mean,
just
Andy
need
Reid in Philadelphia
change.
is the example,
Yeah.
right? Like constantly taking the Eagles to the playoffs year after year. They're
Mhm.
like moving on. Like
Yeah.
we gotta reach another ceiling, like
And
a different ceiling.
and sometimes it works and sometimes it backfires. Who knows? Maybe, Kevin O'Connell's a clueless idiot and like they struggle. But I think he's going to provide a real nice shot of adrenaline to that offense. And then he brings in a veteran defensive coordinator in Ed Donatel, and he's got some chess pieces to play with. Along the defensive line, he's got Dalvin Tomlinson, he's got Harrison Phillips, he's got Armani Watts. Edge rushers, he's got Daniil Hunter, and he's got Zadarius Smith. Linebacker, solid trio in Kendricks, Hicks, and then the rookie Asamoah. Secondary is where it gets a little thinner. Obviously, I like their safety group. Lewis Seen, the rookie with Harrison Smith. Cam Bynum showed some promise. In the slot, they got Shannon Sullivan, but I think Bynum could switch over to the slot with Lewis Seen in the picture now. And then at corner, they got Patrick Peterson, Andrew Booth as probably your 1-2, but then also competing for some time, Harrison Hand, Caleb Evans, and Cameron Dantzler. Stout but shallow up front, elite level edge rushers, solid linebackers. I think for the Minnesota Vikings staying healthy up front because they're very thin along the defensive line,
Mhm.
and having these secondary pieces develop will be key to them challenging Green Bay to sort of win this division.
I agree. I think the secondary is where you wonder what's going to happen because they've made it kind of like they've wanted to like really dip their
Mhm.
toes in the water at corner and they just haven't like pulled the trigger at like a super high, like Andrew Booth in the second round. Okay. But then like they've made a lot of investment, right? A Caleb Evans in the fourth round, Cameron Bynum in the fourth round last year, Cameron Dantzler in the third round in 2020, right? Harrison Hand, fifth round, 20. Like, so
Mhm.
they've sprinkled in quite a few draft picks at corner on this roster. That's going to be the thing that's going to be really interesting to me because they still went out and said, we're not super confident maybe that all of these guys or any of these guys pan out. So we're going to sign Patrick Peterson. Or is it there's no other veteran really in the room to bring all these young guys
Mhm.
along? Let's bring in Patrick Peterson to bring in a guy like Cam Dantzler, who had a lot of um, praise going into that 2020 draft, third round pick, like maybe lower than people thought he was going to get picked. And
Mhm.
then obviously Andrew Booth, the question mark around him will not be the athleticism, but the medicals. So
Yeah.
the secondary to me has a lot of question marks, but it has a lot of potential as
Mhm.
well. And the rest of the roster, the way they filled it in on defense, I really liked it. Obviously, we already talked about Phillips and Jordan
Mhm.
Hicks, but like Daniil Hunter's still there. You signed Zadarius Smith. Like it's a
That's
solid group up and
And
down.
this is a unit that could give the Bills trouble, right? Because guys like Hicks, guys like Kendricks, if he develops and does what he did in college in the pros, guys like Brian Asamoah, they can sort of maybe shut down some of your auxiliary or dump off options. Guys like James Cook, guys like Dawson Knox, guys like OJ
Mhm.
Howard. And if guys like Daniil Hunter and guys like Zadarius Smith aren't checked and Josh Allen's running for his life, the Buffalo Bills could be in trouble. Now, if Josh Allen has time to throw, then guys like Patrick Peterson can be exploited by Stephon Diggs. Guys like Gabriel Davis can exploit Andrew Booth, etc. Like the Buffalo Bills can have success, but it can easily fall apart if Daniil Hunter and Zadarius Smith are just allowed to pin their ears back and are making life a living hell for Josh Allen. We saw that sort of in the Jacksonville game last year. Any defense can dominate us as long as they're applying pressure to the quarterback. And this is a team with the capability to do that. In the comment section, someone mentioned their kicker always sucks, always missing key field goals. What is their kicking situation looking like? They signed Greg Joseph late last year, and he made 13 of 14 field goals. So he is back this year along with Jordan Berry as their punter. And then they got KJ Osborne, Smith Marset, and again, I'm never pronouncing this guy's name correctly, Nguanu from Iowa State as their kick and punt returners. So some solid returners, but a questionable kicker punter unit. Not the greatest thing in the world, but if Greg Joseph is making his kicks, it could turn solid. It could develop into something. That leads us to Thanksgiving Day and the Detroit Lions. This has trap game written all over it for the Buffalo Bills because late last season, Dan Campbell took over that play calling for Anthony Lynn. The Lions were aggressive. They had one of the worst rosters in football, but they were clearly playing for their head coach and playing inspired football. So be interesting to see now with a little bit more talent, whether that sort of fuel and fire and underdog mentality and aggressiveness stays with the Detroit Lions. But they got Dan Campbell. Ben Johnson takes over as the play caller. He was on staff last year below Anthony Lynn. Aaron Glenn is a very good defensive coordinator there, and Dave Phipp is a very good special teams coordinator. So a really good coaching staff assembled there in Detroit by Dan Campbell. They were relatively quiet in free agency. DJ Chark, Jared Davis, Deshaun Elliott, and Mike Hughes. So they added some pieces, but they had a really good draft. I feel like that's something I'm saying for every team but the Dolphins. But that's because we just really loved this draft class. But they went Aiden Hutchinson. They got Jamison Williams. They got Josh Pascal, Kirby Joseph, James Mitchell. I hate to say this. They got Malcolm Rodriguez. It's a perfect fit with Dan Campbell. They got edge rusher James Houston. They got DB Chase Lucas. So in my opinion, two of the top 5 players in the draft, and Aiden Hutchinson. And I thought Jamison Williams, that speed cannot be taught. By the time the Bills play him on Thanksgiving, he will be active for the Detroit Lions. What do you think about this Detroit Lions draft class and free agency class? There's their offseason in general.
I thought DJ Chark was a really good.
The speed they added at wide receiver is filthy.
I like DJ Chark as a potential fit for the Bills. We talked about him a little bit in our lead up to free agency, but like you said, fairly quiet free agency, but getting DJ Chark, and then on top of that, you draft Jamison Williams to complement just route running maven and Amon-Ra St. Brown from a year ago. They all of a sudden have put together a really nice receiving core, and they still have some nice pieces even behind those 3 with Josh Reynolds and Cephas. So as far as the draft, right, because we're going to talk about the depth chart in a second, Hutchinson and Williams, I mean, the fact that they were able to get Hutchinson, who a lot of people thought could have been the number 1 overall pick, and on top of that, what they traded to move up to get Jamison Williams was not a lot, honestly, for how far they moved up, and they traded with division rivals. So that was the even crazier thing to me. But yeah, I mean, I like Kirby Joseph a lot coming into the pre-draft process. I know how much you like Malcolm Rodriguez, and like you said, great fit there with Dan Campbell. So love their draft class. I know that Russ was pretty stoked about it as well. Our resident Lions fan at Cover One, Russell Brown, he was pretty stoked about it, and rightfully so. Right, it was a good draft class, and a lot of things kind of fell their way. And getting that trade with the Vikings to move up and get Jamison Williams kind of just made their draft, in my opinion.
And I'll tell you what, I'm not sure what quarterbacks are still sitting out there in free agency, so maybe they're not done, but I think the biggest mistake Detroit Lions made this offseason was, I'm not saying they had to go out and replace Jared Goff or draft a quarterback high, but the chances of Jared Goff being healthy by the time the Bills play the Detroit Lions on Thanksgiving Day is rare. The chances of him getting through a 17-game season. And I think if you put Tim Boyle or David, Blau into a football game, you're just waving the white flag, no matter how good the rest of your roster is. That's the one issue I have is, what are you saying to your football team? If the starting first of all, when the starting quarterback's active, he's limited to a point where you're probably a 7 to 8 win team at your ceiling this year because of who's at quarterback. And if he goes out, your ceiling is 0 wins because the rest of your quarterbacks probably would struggle in the USFL. That depth chart is bad at quarterback. real bad. So the fact that they didn't even go out and sign a mid-tier veteran quarterback like Chase a Jacoby Brissett or a Tyrod Taylor or whatever quarterback were out there, just someone who would give you a fighting chance if Jared Goff goes down. Now, they are setting themselves up beautifully for 2023, right? Because who's the next disgruntled quarterback? Who's the next Russell Wilson? Who's the next quarterback who doesn't want to play for their football team anymore? Because when they go searching for the best situation and you look at an offense with DeAndre Swift, DJ Chark, Jamison Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, TJ Hawkinson, a solid offensive line and a relatively young and hungry defense, the Detroit Lions look pretty darn appealing.
I'm sure I'm not the first person to say this, but like Baker Mayfield to Detroit.
They should do it. I don't know if he fits in with what Dan Campbell wants to do there and the culture there, but like if the Detroit Lions had Baker Mayfield, I might consider them.
I feel like he could be a fit, honestly. Like
team.
He's a super intense. He's a super intense player on the field. Like he's uber competitive. Yeah. Like that stylistically kind of aligns with Dan Campbell. But like other than that, I don't know. Right. But man, that could be interesting because he's disgruntled. Right.
I mean, are the Detroit Lions really trying to win 3 games this year? Like that's the thing. Because Claude comes in, he makes a great point. They got CJ Stroud. They have Bryce Young. There's a couple other quarterbacks. Like, but I get it. Sometimes you have to do what you have to do. Do they really want to win 3 games this year, 2 games this year? Do they really want to sit there and get into a suckfest competition with the Chicago Bears and the Atlanta Falcons?
I can tell you that Dan Campbell doesn't want to only win.
They're going to win 6 games this year. They're going to win 6 games.
He'll win a game in spite of getting a high draft pick. Like he will do that. So Dan Campbell wants to win games. Like that is clear.
And the paycheck makes sense. Spin makes a great point. The $18 million does not sit well probably for them. I don't know what their cap situation is, but $18 million is probably a little steep.
Yeah.
Well, if the Browns are forced to cut Baker Mayfield and eat all $18 million,
wow,
that would be awesome. I'm
just trying to think of who else could be quote disgruntled. I mean, could Daniel Jones end up in Detroit? Maybe like if he flames out.
I don't know what quarterback would end up getting I don't know if there's any star quarterback in a disgruntled situation right now. I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
Nope, just
like
Baker
Ryan Tannehill not wanting to be Malik Willis's mentor, but Ryan Tannehill's not an elite quarterback. So yeah, maybe they do have to just suck it up and be really bad again. But to me, with Jared Goff 17 games, Jared Goff 17 games, it's a 68 win football team, but I doubt he can get through 17 games. And I don't think they can win a single football game without him. So 3 to 5 win football team, despite the fact that like we're going to go through this roster and they are just the lovable underdogs. There are a lot of really good and likable players. Running back, Jamal Williams and DeAndre Swift is a really good 1-2 punch. When Jamison Williams comes back, and he will be back, Kyler Murray, great point from Wilson Senior, Kyler Murray.
Hey.
Wide receiving core, once Jamison Williams comes back, it's Jamison Williams, DJ Chark, all that speed on the outside, Amon-Ra St. Brown and TJ Hawkinson working the middle. And they even got Josh Reynolds still there as like sort of a really solid inside-outside wide receiver 4. And James Mitchell should be healthy by the time the season starts to sort of play off TJ Hawkinson as TE2 a little bit. And then their offensive line from left to right, it's Taylor Decker, Jonah Jackson, Frank Ragnow, Halope Vaitai, and Penei Sewell. Like just a really good offensive line as well. So solid offensive line, solid running backs, and okay when healthy protected quarterback, really fast receivers, plus a really good slot guy in Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, just...
And they still have, and Quintus Cephas had a nice impact last year too. Like they've got guys.
Possession receiver,
Possession receiver. And remember, TJ Hawkinson last year battled like that ankle injury or whatever it was, like pretty much all season. And then ultimately kind of like ended up like getting, I'm not sure if he ended up having surgery or not, but like he wasn't even really healthy for most of the last season. And he's a top 5 tight end when healthy in the league. So, I mean, he's a stud, and that offensive line is solid.
And there was, and you think about it too, when the Bills, and this is a team that's going to be dangerous for the Buffalo Bills on Thanksgiving Day, 4 days rest, number one. You look at the Detroit Lions, a team last year when they were out of contention. So who knows what the record's going to be this year? Went to a game. I believe they faked 2 punts in a game against the Rams. Now they weren't good enough to capitalize off of being successful with those 2 fake punts. And you saw other games where they were running a lot of trick plays towards the end of last year. I believe they beat the Packers down the stretch or something like that. So you look at a team like Detroit, 4 days rest, Thanksgiving Day, that national stage, Dan Campbell getting them, hungry for kneecaps more than turkey legs. They could go out there and they could do some damage against Buffalo Bills. If Jared Goff is healthy, that's a team that could score enough points to upset the Buffalo Bills on Turkey Day because of that sort of advantage of only having 4 days to prepare.
They could. But Jared Goff doesn't scare me. Like, I mean, they struggled.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, of course.
But you're right. I mean, they have weapons, right? If they get that running game going with Swift and Williams, like, yes. I mean, we saw the Bills kind of struggle early in the game against the Falcons last year, not too dissimilar. And that was at home for the Bills. So yes, if you're gonna talk about a trap game, this could be it as well as the next team we're gonna talk about. But oh man, how disappointing that would be if the Bills were to lose to the Detroit Lions. Oh my god.
And Renaissance Man comes in and he also makes a good point. Who knows? Maybe on a short week, it's advantage the team that's just experienced and been there and done that and understands big stages. I mean, you saw the Buffalo Bills absolutely shit kick the Dallas Cowboys on Thanksgiving. You saw the Buffalo Bills go in and absolutely shit kick the New Orleans Saints on Thanksgiving. So, I mean, the last 2 years, they've just curb stomped teams on Thanksgiving. So, again, a team that's been there, a team that's done that. So maybe Renaissance Man is the other side of the argument. Maybe where I'm overthinking this and it's and the Bills will roll. But I look at their defense. Dude, here's their rotation. They are literally 5 deep. I'm not saying these guys are any of these players are elite or anything because Aiden Hutchinson is still young, but they're literally 5 deep in their rotation at edge. It's Aiden Hutchinson, Charles Harris, who they re-signed, the Aquara brothers, Julian and Romeo, and they drafted Josh Pascal. So they're literally 5 deep at edge rusher. They got some really solid but young interior defensive linemen, Aleem McNeil, Levi Onwuzurike, and John Pacini from Utah. Always good to have a Samoan as a defensive tackle on your football team, unless it's Starlo Tule. And then Michael Brockers as well, sort of a veteran along that defensive line. Their linebackers are a little weak. It's Derek Brown. It's Alex Anzalone. They brought back Jared Davis. They do have Malcolm Rodriguez, who I like, but you definitely wouldn't say there's any name players or stud players in that linebacking core. And you would probably say the same about the secondary. Amari Orurie, I can't speak today. Amari Orurie from Penn State a couple of years ago, rather high draft pick, sort of came on late last year. What are they going to get from Jeffrey Okudah? Ifeatu Melifonwu, what are they going to get from him? Mike Hughes, who they signed, probably going to play nickel for them. They signed Deshaun Elliott, Tracy Walker, 2 solid veteran safeties, but they're nothing spectacular. And then you got the youngster Kirby Joseph and Will Harris there. So a lot of rookies, a lot of finger quotes, guys who need to take the next step. So they have a deep arsenal of edge rushers. They got a good, promising young group. But against the Bills, this shouldn't matter because the inexperience is probably going to rule the day when the Buffalo Bills offense goes up against this Detroit Lions defense, especially that secondary.
I mean, their defensive line is clearly the strength of this team inside and out. And then it kind of gets, I don't want to say weaker as you go out because I do think their secondary is a little bit better than their linebacking group. But yeah, there is a lot of question marks in the back end and in the linebacking group. So this secondary does not scare me at all. I do like some of the younger players, like Iffy. Obviously, we liked him last year, and Okudah was a very high draft pick, and I like Kirby Joseph as well. But their safeties don't scare me. Mike Hughes, maybe thought he could have been like a bargain bin type free agent signing for the Bills in free agency. The Lions go out and sign him, like you said, he's probably going to play the nickel, but the Bills ate him alive in those games last year. So when he was with the Chiefs, so this secondary doesn't scare me. And the more I think about that, maybe Renaissance Man is onto something here because Are they gonna be able at all to slow down this Bills offense? I'm not sure.
And then they got an interesting special teams group. Khalif Raymond's a really good return man for them, solid. Riley Patterson's a promising young kicker. Jack Fox is their punter. So it's a young, promising group, but certainly a lot of inexperience, especially at the kicker position, going into his second year there for Riley Patterson. All right, on to the Chicago Bears now. The Chicago Bears, another new coaching staff. Matt Eberflus, the defensive coordinator for the Indianapolis Colts. Luke Getsy, the quarterback's coach from Green Bay, comes on over to coordinate this offense. You've got Alan Williams coordinating the defense and Richard Hightower coordinating special teams. I was really excited for Matt Eberflus to finally get a shot, but then they hired Ryan Poles as their assistant general manager and have essentially like gone really all in on what appears to be a tank and a sabotaging of their young quarterback in Chicago. So now I kind of feel bad for Matt Eberflus. I don't know. What are your thoughts on this coaching staff here in Chicago?
I don't know. Like I mean, like you take a head coaching job if you can get one, obviously, if you're Matt Eberflus, but like you said, like this could be the worst team in the NFL this year. Like worst, like legitimately the worst team. Like they're not Vegas wise projected for the fewest wins. That's the Texans at 4.5, but they're right there at 6. So and I think that's generous. I know it's 17 game season, but I don't know, man. I like Eberflus. I like him, but I wonder if we're going to look back on this and say maybe he was better served as a coordinator, or he just went into the wrong situation, wrong time. Like who was the guy from, why am I blanking? Wilkes from Arizona a couple of years ago. Just horrible
That'd
situation.
be brutal for him. That'd be brutal for him if it turned into that.
Yeah.
I don't think it will turn to that just because like Arizona has their like drunk GM, Steve Keim, who has the ear of the owner and just never gets fired. But yeah, it's just a weird situation. So again, I sort of at the top of the show and Jason Taylor comes in and says, any faith in Justin Fields? I like Justin Fields. They are doing him a disservice. Like, when we get to their offensive line, oh my gosh. So here's their free agency in a nutshell. And again, the word I used at the beginning of the show, the top of the show, was they were just throwing darts at a wall and they're hoping to see if one or two of them stick. Trevor Siemian, Nathan Peterman, Byron Pringle, which is one I actually like, Byron Pringle. Equinemius St. Brown, Ryan Griffin, the tight end, James O'Shaughnessy, the tight end, Lucas Patrick, the center, Dakota Dozier, the guard, Q Muhammad, the defensive lineman from the Colts, who could be like a sleepy good signing, but like he's a rotational defensive end. Justin Jones, sneaky good signing, but a rotational defensive tackle, doesn't move the needle. Nicholas Morrow, a sneaky good like third linebacker, but again, doesn't move the needle. And then Dane Cruikshank, a veteran, sort of like Dean Marlowe type of, utility safety. That was their free agent class. That was it. That's what they went and did for Justin Fields. Their offensive linemen were Lucas Patrick and Dakota Dozier. Their wide receivers were Byron Pringle, Equinemius St. Brown, and Ryan Griffin. That's what they did for Justin Fields in free agency. Like that, I for the life of me, I can't understand why they weren't pursuing like the Cincinnati Bengals, pursuing every veteran offensive lineman, pursuing more veteran wide receivers with some more upside. I just don't understand it.
Or try to keep your own in James Daniels, which they weren't able to do. Their free agency was maybe this is the theme of the Bears, the worst, one of the worst in the offseason for a team that needs an influx of talent. You were super pedestrian in free agency. Like, yeah, I love Byron Pringle too, but like he's a perfect fit for a team like the Bills as like a 4th or 5th receiver. He's not a guy that if you're the Bears, you're signing him to be like your number 1 wide receiver. Like it makes zero sense. And like you are doing a disservice to Justin Fields. Like Cole Kmet could be the best offensive weapon they have when all's said and done this year. Now, I mean, no disrespect to Darnell Mooney, who is a good player, but like, man, this was pretty bad. I mean, like offensive line not addressed. Like to the extent you needed to. One of the worst offensive lines in the league.
It's the worst.
Skill positions. You did nothing. You did nothing to help Justin
Yeah.
Fields. You just added a bunch of dudes, right? Like you said, dart throws, like bad, really bad, like worst in the league. One of the worst in the league.
I just, and we got to get to the draft first. And there are things I think the Bears could have done. Like I look at their wide receiver core and it's Darnell Mooney, Equinemius St. Brown, Byron Pringle, Velus Jones Jr. I didn't even get to some of their other free agent signings, like guys like Tajay Sharp, David Moore, Dante Pettis, like literally just a graveyard of guys who never lived up to their potential. And yeah, Mooney is their number one. If their wide receiver core was Darnell Mooney, Allen Robinson, they kept Allen Robinson, Byron Pringle, and Velus Jones Jr. to go along with the running backs that they have, a young and promising tight end in Cole Kmet. And if they went out and actually addressed offensive line, like if their focus, they should have just said, screw defense. They should have said, screw it. And their whole focus should have been a surrounding Justin Fields with as much talent as possible, getting a legit number one receiver to go with those three young guys in Pringle, Jones, and Mooney, who don't suck. They're just not alphas. And getting a offensive line with a pulse who will allow your offense to move, who will allow your young quarterback to actually sit back and read through his progressions. If they would have added an offensive line and kept Robinson, or at least added a bona fide, semi-decent wide receiver, veteran wide receiver to this unit, I would be praising this Bears offseason, no matter how bad the defense was. Because if you're the Chicago Bears, the 2023 season is not about not embarrassing yourself. It's about one person. It's about Justin Fields. I don't care if you give up 60 points a game. It's about Justin Fields and developing that offense. The defense doesn't matter for the Chicago Bears in 2023 or 2022. They're irrelevant. They don't matter. It's all about Justin Fields, and they failed him miserably. I mean, Ryan Poles, what an inept start to his tenure in Chicago. If I'm a Bears fan, I'm just so enraged at the job that he did. Disgusted. Like, I can't even think of it. Another adjective. Just, whew.
I mean, you talk about you should have just ignored the defense, and then you're about to talk about the draft. They went and just go for the defense with our first two picks. So,
yeah, I mean, their defense, I like their draft, and I think their secondary is the only thing about this football team that's worth a damn. They drafted Kyler Gordon, Jaquan Brisker, two really talented young defensive backs. But what does it matter if your front four is going to get pushed around? Because they're going to get pushed around. They're not good. Velus Jones Jr., the wide receiver, Braxton Jones, the offensive tackle, who I think has some decent upside, but he's young and he's not going to be plug and play. Dominique Robinson, a good rotational edge rusher who could turn into something. Zach Thomas, a depth offensive lineman. Treston Ebner, a kick returner. Doug Kramer, a depth offensive lineman. Jatir Carter, a depth offensive lineman. Elijah Hicks, a developmental safety. And Trenton Gill, an NC State punter. So that'll probably work out for him.
He'll be getting a lot of reps. I'll tell you that.
So it's a solid class. They traded back too much, like they kept trading back. Like and this is not a knock on Zach Thomas or Doug Kramer or Jatir Carter, because I like them all as developmental offensive linemen, but could you have had a plug and play guy if you didn't trade back so much? Like they traded back a ton. So, it's just and then to go back to the depth chart, we talked about the skill guys, the offensive line. Here's the offensive line from left to right. Larry Borum at left tackle, Cody Whiteheart at left guard, Lucas Patrick at center. It's either Sam Mustapher or Dakota Dozier at right guard. And then it's Tevin Jenkins at right tackle. And I like Tevin Jenkins, but he had that spinal issue, that back issue. And then their swing tackle is Julian Davenport. So who knows? Maybe Tevin Jenkins turns into something. And then they have all the darts that they threw in Braxton Jones, Jatir Carter, Doug Kramer, and Zachary Thomas. But they better have a good offensive line coach, because while all these guys have promise, none of them are plug and play rookies. So I feel so bad for Justin Fields.
Sorry about it, Bears. You had to lose out on Rick Bates.
Yeah.
Sorry.
And Adam D says previous regime left them basically unwinnable spot. Exactly. They weren't going to win games this year. So go all in on at least seeing if your quarterback is the dude and not breaking him. Like they're going to break Justin Fields this year.
They're going to break Justin Fields. And I feel so bad for him because, like you said with the draft, right? Trading back, like You went and you draft Jaquan Brisker, you draft Kyler Gordon, and I mean, you drafted Thomas Graham a year ago. You drafted Jalen Johnson 2 years ago. Like, how many
Mhm,
corners are you gonna draft before you, like, say, like, "Maybe we should just go ahead and pick a guy to help our offense, help our
mhm.
quarterback?" Like, even if you had drafted an offensive lineman, I would've been okay with that. But, like, you
Yeah.
waited and traded back, and you took 2 6th-rounders and a 7th-rounder for your offensive line who are just gonna mix in and could end up being just dudes, like, along that offensive line. The Bears just have, like, a volume of crap, like, and it's no offense to the guys drafted this year, but, like, they're late round guys. Like,
Mhm.
the chances of them making a huge impact in 2022 are low. They may make an impact later on down the road, but, like, probably not in 2022. So, man, I feel bad for Justin Fields.
At first, I didn't understand why Bears fans were so upset they lost out on Ryan Bates, and then I realized exactly why Bears
Yeah.
fans were so sad that they lost out on Ryan Bates. We got a super chat here from Jeffrey Green. I always appreciate you, Jeffrey. He said, "Hey guys, haven't talked to you in a minute. Go Bills, go Bills, Jeffrey. I always appreciate you. You've been with us for 2, 3, 4 years now, so you've been along with us
Mhm.
since the very beginning. So always appreciate that, Jeffrey. Thank you so much." Looking at their defense, Robert Quinn, LQ Muhammad, Dominique Robinson, Travis Gibson, Jeremiah Atachu. Like, there's Robert Quinn had a really good season last year, but now he's going back from a 34 to a 43. And I understand it's all relative and less of a big deal than it was in previous years and previous decades of football. Interior defensive line: Angelo Blackson, Justin Jones, Mario Edwards, Kaiir Tonga. Linebackers: Nicholas Morrow, Roquan Smith, Matthew Adams, Joe Thomas. I mean, up front, like, no offense to guys like Robert Quinn or Justin Jones or LQ Muhammad or a developmental guy like Dominique Robinson, like, it's just not good up front. Like, the Buffalo Bills should just be able to do whatever they want whenever they want against the front seven of the Chicago Bears defense.
Yeah, I mean, Quinn's getting up there. Obviously, Tonga, I like last year as
Mhm.
a
Yeah.
like a one tech kind of prospect, but like, what is he really going to do to move the
When surrounded
needle?
by all that garbage.
Yeah, it's just it like it's just another example
Yeah.
of just an average to below average overall unit. Like, there's
Mhm.
some okay players in there. I mean, even Justin Jones isn't bad. Like, Justin Jones is
Eh.
okay. But the collection, the depth, it's like it doesn't inspire a ton of confidence, and you wonder, like, you start to think back and wonder, and you're like, "What have the Bears been doing the last couple years? Like, what's their direction?" And, like, it's
Mhm.
clear to me there was no direction, and now the Brian Poles is, like, started off on a bad foot too, and,
Oh,
like,
he's off such an awful start.
and I said from the beginning, I thought Matt Nagy was overrated. So, like, for him to be gone, good on you. But, like, you've put Matt Eberflus in a very tough,
Mhm.
really tough situation. Um, so I mean, look, Roquan Smith is the best
Yeah.
player on this defense, right? Like, I
Yeah,
mean,
him and
he's the
Robert
best
Quinn.
player. Him and Robert Quinn, the best player on this defense, and
Mhm. And
those
Jalen
guys.
Johnson had a pretty good rookie year too.
Yeah, no, I like Jalen Johnson
Mhm.
coming into what his 3rd year now.
Yeah, second,
So
yeah,
I like him too. Like, if
and
we're
that's the thing, like, the only there are 3 redeeming qualities about this football team. Like, they have really good, like, secondary receiving options like Pringle, Velus Jones-Jr., Darnell Mooney. They have probably the best plethora of return men in the NFL in Daz Newsome, Khalil Herbert, Trusted Ebner, and Velus Jones-Jr., and then it's their secondary. Like, these are the things that if you're a Chicago Bears fan, you're like, "Well, this is what I got to be excited about." And the secondary is something to legitimately be excited about. I mean, Jalen Johnson and Kyler Gordon uh, have a chance to be a really good 1-2 duo at corner. Thomas Graham,
Mhm.
their third corner, showed a lot of promise last year to the point where, like, Tavon Young, who's often injured, their veteran nickel corner. If he gets hurt, Kyler Gordon switches inside. Thomas Graham plays the boundary. So you got some flexibility there. You add Jaquan Brisker to Eddie Jackson. You signed Dane Cruikshank. You signed DeAndre Houston Carson. So there's some depth there in the secondary, both at corner and safety. Like, they have an exciting, young, athletic, versatile secondary, and it's really literally the only redeeming quality of this football team.
It's my favorite position group. Like, it's my favorite area of the defense. I like Jalen Johnson, as a prospect in that draft coming out. Thomas Graham was a guy last year we thought could be a fit for the Bills. That Oregon secondary put a bunch of dudes into the draft last year. I'm blanking on the other dude's name. That he had the long first name. I can't remember his name now, but also from Oregon. So they had a lot of guys coming.
Diamador Lamar.
Yeah, Lonar. And then your guy Kyler Gordon this year. So the secondary looks nice, and Eddie Jackson's obviously the kind of emotional and veteran leader in that group. So, like, the group does have a guy they can look at and lean on, and it is promising. But if you're hanging your hat on the secondary as, like, the overall kind of, like, shining light on the entire team, not just the defense, but, like, the entire team, it's not going to go well for you this year if you're the Bears. There's just no conceivable way where I can see this team being competitive.
And if you're the Bears, Pops Mafia says, where does Velus Jones be on the wide receiver depth chart? I look at him now and I'm like, wide receiver 3. It's probably going to be Moody, St. Brown, Pringle, and Jones Jr. But I think Jones Jr., even though I have him listed 4th there, it'll probably be Mooney, Jones Jr., and Pringle. But the thing is, too, and he'll probably be your number 1 kick returner, too, or punt returner, excuse me. Kick returner is Khalil Herbert. But they drafted him in the 3rd round, which is about a round or even 2 rounds higher than a lot of people assumed Velus Jones is going to be drafted because of his age. There were some people, and this is best case scenario for Bears fans. I'm reaching into my bag of tricks here to try to help you in some way, shape, or form, give you some form of hope. There was a lot of like shades of Terry McLaurin. People were saying shades of Terry McLaurin during the Senior Bowl when it came to Velus Jones Jr. and the way he was, playing in some of the one-on-one drills. So, like, if you're a Bears fan, your best hope is that, like, Velus Jones Jr. is the surprise of the draft receiving group and comes out and has a rookie year like Terry McLaurin, and a guy like Darnell Mooney continues to play like he does, and Byron Pringle can then take over that slot gadget role, and then you do have a solid receiver core. But the chances of that happening with how young that position group is, again, like I said, I'm reaching into I'm just trying to find anything for you here, Bears fans. It's not pretty. And then special teams, Cairo Santos is your kicker, rookie Trenton Gill is your punter. And then, like I said, not the teams are going to be punting on you a lot with that defense, but Treston Ebner, you might get a lot of kick returns out of this unit. Treston Ebner, Khalil Herbert, Daz Newsome, and Velus Jones. Those are 4 guys who are known for their kick and punt return ability. So they have a whole plethora of dudes that they can call upon in those situations there. All right. So
solid special teams. Solid. I mean, Cairo Santos was decent last year. I mean, he's kind of had a little bit of a renaissance, but yeah, solid special teams, I would say. So I guess that's a shining light too if you're a Bears fan.
All right. So getting towards the end of the show here, let's power rank the NFC North. And people in the comment section, you can sort of power rank best to worst. Who's the best team, second best team, third best team? And then there's the Bears. So how do you power rank? The NFC North this year, Dave? I'll start with you.
I think this is going to be a pretty common answer, but I'm going Packers, Vikings, Lions, Bears, 1 through 4.
Mm-hmm.
I think a hot take could be to put the Vikings number 1, but I'm not ready to go there yet. I still think with Aaron Rodgers, you have to give the Packers the edge, and LaFleur has done an excellent job with that team and all the stuff that's surrounding it. And I just can't put a first-year head coach, as much as I like the Vikings roster, I can't put a first-year head coach above LaFleur and above Aaron Rodgers. So until they dethrone the Packers, I'm still putting them number 1. So it'll go Packers, Vikings, Lions, Bears for me.
Pops Mafia comes in and says Vikings, Packers, Lions, Bears. Justin Taylor comes in and says Packers, Vikings, Lions, Bears. And then Claude Puy says Green Bay and Mini. I think he's trying to say the other 2 teams are irrelevant here. And excuse me, my allergies are starting to kick in. So if I sound funny, it's because I can't breathe out of my nose right now. But I'm with you, Dave, as well. It's tough because I think that Kevin O'Connell could be the shot in the arm that this Minnesota team needs, sort of that shot of adrenaline. And I think they can challenge the Packers, But I look at that Packers defense, and I just look at the fact that they'll be able to run the ball at will, be able to control the clock, play good defense. It's just tough. As much as I want to be the hot take artist here and put Minnesota over Green Bay, I can't do it. But it wouldn't shock me if it does happen. So I am with you, and Douglas is with you as well in terms Green Bay, Mini, Detroit, and then the Bears. Last question here before we call it an evening, because I literally can't breathe. I'm probably going to pass out at some point. What record do you think the Bills have against the NFC North this year? So people in the comment section, comment along with your take here. And Dave, I'll start with you. What record do you think the Buffalo Bills are going to have in these 4 games this season?
4-0. They're going to be 4-0 in these games. I can't say that the Packers are obviously going to be the toughest test, I think, that primetime game coming off the bye. The Vikings might be a tough test, although the Bills do play that game at home as well. I do like the fact that the Bills play the 2 toughest teams at home. So they play the Packers and the Vikings at home, whereas they play the Lions and the Bears on the road. So I really like that for the Bills, and I do like that they get to play the Packers out of the bye week. Which is a nice little perk as well for the Bills. So I think that the Packers are their most likely chance to lose a game against this division, but I'm going to go out and say they're going to go 4-0 against this division this year. Give me 4-0 against the NFC North.
Pops Mafia comes in and says 3-1. Spin 0481 comes in and says 4-0. Amy Wagner says, great show, gents. Thank you. We always appreciate that, Amy. And she says, Bills 4-0. Renaissance Man says 4-0 as well. Spin says, I'm more worried about the Vikings than the Pack. Pops Mafia says he thinks in his 3-1 prediction they're tripped up against the Vikings, and Cook has a big game. And I think that's him and Aaron Jones are like the 2 players. Yes. Who knows, maybe even DeAndre Swift, but I doubt it's not as much to a degree. But, I look at the NFC North this year. Obviously, Green Bay is the top dog. I think Minnesota could get that boost of adrenaline from the hiring of Kevin O'Connell. I think 4-0 still got to be your expectation, especially getting Green Bay off the bye. 3-1 might be the harsh reality. That's just the way the NFL works. It's tough to win football games in the National Football League. And if you go 2-2 against the NFC North, you better clean up somewhere else on the rest of your schedule. Like go 4-4 or 4-0 in the AFC North or something of that nature. You better clean up, because if you go 2-2, that does not bode well for your chance of getting the 1 seed. And you're then talking like 10-11 wins as opposed to 13-14 wins. So the Buffalo Bills do need to sort of clean up in that regard. But Spin does come in with you'd rather lose the NFC games than the AFC games. So a little bright, cheery note to sort of end the broadcast here. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Dave, any final thoughts before we head out here?
The NFC North, it's interesting, right? I mean, Josh has had some of his most, he had one of his most memorable plays in his career against the Vikings in that game where he made, where he hurdled, and that was the graphic on our thumb for today. And that was a bit of his coming out party, right? As a rookie, in the game where the Vikings were huge favorites, and Josh went in there and kind of showed the world what he could do. So I'm excited to see them play this division this year. Obviously, excited to see them play the Packers. That'll be fun in my house. And it'll be nice to kind of see the Bills play the Vikings again, kind of where the Josh Allen mystique almost started in a way. So that'll be it'll be fun.
All right. So Cover One has you covered every night of the week for the most part. So make sure you tune in tomorrow where you'll have the film room. I think you'll have the Hoof podcast as well. OTA start tomorrow. So expect them to actually talk about, some Buffalo Bills related things on the docket for tomorrow. We'll be back on Thursday. We'll give our thoughts on OTAs, what we've seen over the course of Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday. And we'll be breaking down I believe when I sort of made the spreadsheet for us, I called them the primetime games, the Chiefs, the Tennessee Titans, and what's the other team? The LA Rams. And it turns out 2 of the 3 games were in primetime, because those are sort of our other opponents, the other 1 seeds that sort of ended up on our schedule because we were also the 1 seed. So we will be talking Titans, Chiefs, and Rams to round out our opponent preview. And we'll be talking Bills OTAs on Thursday. I'll make sure that I take my Mucinex before the show and get it all out of my system. I get an hour and a half, and it just all started to clog up there. So I apologize. Anyone listening on podcasting form has probably turned it off right now. But if you are listening on a podcasting platform, please give us a nice rating and review. If you are listening to this on demand, leave a comment in the comment section. We will do our best to get back to you. There was a great comment. I don't know if you saw this from a Ravens fan. Guy wrote like a novel in the comment section talking about the Ravens and some of his takes on our takes. And it was a great little thread that he put together in the YouTube comments of the last show. So just loved it. Loved reading it. Loved responding to it. And yeah, leave a comment. Me and Dave will try to get back to the comments as well. And if you're still here, make sure you smash that like on your way out. And until next time, go Bills.
Go Bills.
Are we having fun yet?